Hi everyone. I'm doing this video today to respond to the events that have been unfolding in Ukraine over the past week. That terrible humanitarian disaster that is now unfolding. I wasn't initially sure if I wanted to make this video because this is predominantly a spiritual channel, but I've decided to make it for two reasons. The first is that I've got quite a strong background in politics. I've been involved in politics for many years. I've worked in politics. I even considered pursuing a political career for myself at one point before I decided that that was not the path I wanted to go on, and I wanted to try and be a spiritual teacher instead. So the point that I'm trying to make there is that I know a thing or two about politics and good government, and I can bring that to bear in my commentary on the issues of the last week. But the other reason why I wanted to make this video is because unlike certain people who describe themselves as spiritual, I don't just look at the world with a sense of detachment and act like I'm above all of the world karma that we're seeing being processed at the moment, that I'm somehow so enlightened that I don't have any attachment to what is going on in society around me. I'm not like that. I believe that to be a genuinely spiritual person means to be very engaged with the world and to care when you see wickedness and injustice unfolding around you, and you see the need to take a stand against that. That is what has happened in all of the great religious epics of every civilization, whether it be the story of Rama or Krishna, or the story of Moses in Egypt, or the story of the Maccabean revolt. Wherever there is injustice and oppression by a wicked world ruler, the divine always sides with the oppressed, rising up against their oppressors. And so I feel to be a truly spiritual person, to be a person who is truly aligned with the will of the divine, I too have a responsibility to condemn injustice when I see it being practiced by the governments of the world. And so, like almost everybody on earth right now, I condemn the actions of Vladimir Putin wholeheartedly. What he has unleashed on Ukraine is an atrocity of proportions not seen in Europe for decades, and it will not be quickly forgotten. I cannot really understand why Putin has done this, aside from the fact that there is no moral justification for what he has done to Ukraine and to its people and what he plans to do. There's no strategic advantage to it either. He has alienated his long-term allies at a time in history when Russia is not the superpower that it used to be, and without its allies it can't really be taken seriously on the world stage at all. He has sacrificed all of that, and for what? So that he can take over a bit of Ukraine, the east of it, or all of Ukraine, if he's lucky. Is it really worth it? Or perhaps he wants to try and push further, in which case he will be drawn into a conflict with the countries of NATO, and he will face nuclear annihilation. So it's hard to see what the benefit is there either. The only reason why Putin could be doing what he is doing is because he knows that he is getting old, that he's been in power for 22 years. Even Stalin was only in power for 30 years. So he knows he only has a few years left to leave his mark on the world, and perhaps quite literally in the form of a nuclear crater. And so that's what he wants to do, to to satisfy his vanity and his ego and his megalomania. That's the only explanation that I can think of. To enact some kind of revenge fantasy on the Western world. So that is the point that we find ourselves at. It's a very confusing, very distressing time. But if the path of righteousness is to take a stand against unrighteousness, and we live at a time when the drums of war are beating again, and it seems inevitable that everyone has to take a side, we need to be careful and identify what the true enemy is, and who the people are who are fighting or struggling on the side of righteousness. And let me start by saying the real enemy here is not Russia as a whole. The actions that we see unfolding now are the actions of one dictator. And let's be honest, that's what Putin is. He's a dictator. It is not the Russian people that are responsible for this. In fact, many Russians, an inspiring number of Russians, have been going out onto the street and protesting against this war. And many celebrities as well have come out in protest against Vladimir Putin and his actions. And it's not like in Western democracies where protesting, although I won't say that it's easy because the police can still try and brutalize protests if they want to, it's not the same as in Russia. If you protest the government in Russia, you face severe, severe repression. And the people that are in the streets in their thousands in Russia understood that, and they went to protest anyway. So there is just no way that you can say that the Russians are the enemy. National boundaries are arbitrary divisions between people, and it is only craven authoritarian rulers of governments that think that we should wage war on one another based on those boundaries. But then, who are the heroes of the story? Is it the Western countries? The countries of NATO? Well, I don't think that you can say that America and the American government, American state, is a heroic force. Long before Ukraine, the American military and the American government has waged its fair share of pointless wars where it has completely leveled other countries that are smaller than it in the pursuit of some deranged dream of global domination. And when the American government waged its own wars of domination and control on the rest of the world, there were millions in Western countries that protested against their own government as they engaged in war crimes and crimes against humanity in far-off countries in the Middle East, and as they undermined the democratic principles that they claimed to uphold by not only destroying sovereign nations abroad, but undermining freedom and liberty at home by introducing legislation such as the Patriot Act and anti-terror laws across other Western nations. But once again, there was a pattern there. It was the people who took a stand for what was right, even when it meant opposing their own government. And so that is the true dividing line here. It is the dividing line between the people and what is in the best interests of everybody in society, not just a select few, not just the military-industrial complex, not just the CEOs of all of the oil companies, not just the corrupt oligarchs that have connections to the Kremlin, but what is in the best interests of everybody, and treating everybody fairly. And that is what the principles of democracy stand for, and that is what the principles of the rule of law stand for. And in opposition to that is autocracy, is dictatorship, is the idea that there should be a single demagogue who has absolute authority, whose authority is arbitrary, and who uses that authority to silence and repress any opposition to him in the pursuit of greater and greater power and domination over others. And that is the true dividing line that we see drawn here. And Putin himself has dedicated his life to waging an ideological war against democracy and trying to counter the spread of democracy around the rest of the world by having his own counter campaign of encouraging authoritarianism around the world. And this is not just about East versus West either, because democratic principles of freedom for all people and fairness for all people are not unique to Western civilization. They are universal principles. And this desire for freedom and democracy around the world, although democracy in the world has been on the wane, unfortunately, over the past 16 years, if you look at the long-term trends, we're still moving towards a more free, open, and democratic world. And even though democratic rights have been curtailed in much of the world, there's only so much success that authoritarian political leaders can have in doing that, because the yearning for freedom, the yearning for justice is like a genie in the bottle. Once it has been released, it is very, very hard to bottle it up again. And because human beings are creatures of conscience, of individual conscience, it is in our nature to strive for freedom. And that striving, that yearning, is more enduring than any political institutions that we can build up around the human race, any black iron prisons that we can build up around people. The bars of iron will erode long before the flame of freedom and the yearning for freedom burns out. And so Putin represents a way of thinking that is going extinct. And he knows this. He already knows this. But in his hubris, he thinks that he can somehow single-handedly stop the forward march of democracy. He underestimates democracy. He sees it as weak. He sees it as something that is ineffective. But in fact, he is the weak one, because he's so insecure about his own position and the spread of this supposedly weak and ineffective form of government that he has brazenly sent his military into a neighboring country that was considered the brother of Russia in order to prove a political point to the rest of the world and show how much of an alpha he is to the rest of the world. So it's pretty clear who the weak one truly is. And all of the countries that used to be under the thumb of Russia, that used to be under the Russian boot, in Poland, in the Czech Republic, in Slovakia, in Hungary, all of those countries threw off the shackles of Russian domination, and they won independence for themselves, and they won freedom for themselves. And Ukraine and Belarus nearby have also begun to shake off the yoke of Russian imperialism and decided that they too want to become free. And that is something that terrifies Vladimir Putin. But it is inevitable. And so too is the inevitability of democracy in Russia itself. Now that sounds like a very outlandish thing for me to say. But mark my words, and remember what I have said this day, decades from now, for those who are watching, that I said that one day there would be democracy in Russia. That is what I predict. That is what I have seen. when Putin is no longer in power, there will be no person who can replace him, because he concentrated so much power into his own hands and suffered no rival for so long that he made it impossible to be replaced. That's a very big power vacuum to leave behind. And the youth of Russia have been coming out in greater and greater numbers, wanting greater freedom, and that isn't going to stop. And when there is weakness in the Russian state, they will see an opportunity to push back the way that they have been pushed by the government their entire lives. And eventually, there will be democracy. And eventually, the people of Russia will succeed in doing what the other former Eastern Bloc countries have done. And they will bring about the sequence of events that Putin tried to thwart when he took power towards the end of the 1990s. And they will establish a Russia that has a genuine, free, open, liberal, democratic system of government. And when that happens, the nation of Russia will reorient itself and form new alliances and new treaties and new relationships with the other democratic countries of the world. And as a result of that, we will see a peace spread across the world, the likes of which has never been seen. A peace which will make the long peace following World War II look like nothing but a joke. That is my prediction for the future. And so I hope that I can provide you all with a little bit of hope in these dark times, that things will get better. There is a lot of things going wrong in the world at the moment, and there is a very serious struggle that the Ukrainian people have in the near future. But the people living in Eastern Europe, they've been through a lot. In the countries that are part of the former Soviet bloc, the people there have survived Nazi occupation and Nazi atrocities, and they have survived decades of political repression and soul-crushing authoritarianism in the form of Soviet rule. And they've survived all of that. And most of the countries that were part of that have resisted both forms of authoritarianism, and they have prevailed. And so the Ukrainian people will not be easily crushed, as Putin believes they will be. And at the end of all of this, the loser will be Putin himself. And Russia will be in a situation that it hasn't been in since the end of the Russo-Japanese War in the early 20th century, or the end of the First World War in 1918, where an authoritarian leader sent its people, the Russian people, into a pointless war which turned the people against said autocratic ruler. And I believe the same thing will happen as a result of the Russia-Ukraine war as well. And it's been a long time coming. So, in the midst of all this darkness, hold on to hope. That is the most important thing. There is hope. The human spirit will prevail. The spirit of freedom and justice will prevail. So long as we keep pushing back against tyranny and oppression, whether we see that from a foreign nation or from our own government, we must always cling to freedom and never take it for granted, and not let it vanish from our world. And if we can come together under that common goal, then we will be stronger than every tyrant in the world. And if we can persevere and cling to the human spirit, then we will prevail. Because the spirit of humanity and the human will and the human desire towards freedom is more powerful than all the dictators in all the world. So that is what I have to say in response to Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Leave your comments down below, what your feelings are about what's going on in the world. And don't let your faith in the power of humanity fade. Because we aren't just animals. We have soul. We have soul that is connected to conscience, and we have a desire for freedom, and we have a spark of divinity within us that aspires to be free and yearns for freedom for every other person on earth. And that is powerful, and that will always endure. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.